Everyone faces a bad day in their life, and so I too. Hi, this is John, and this is the story of when I was in school. My exams were on and I was in the classroom solving question paper. A single bead of sweat rolled down the middle of my forehead and made its lonely journey along the bridge of my nose, finally settling at the tip. It hung there precariously for what seemed a lifetime before dropping downward. It landed squarely on the question paper, nestling between the number 25 and the beginning of the actual question. I was completely oblivious of it or the other beads of sweat that were pouring copiously from my head. Some even stung my eyes painfully, but I made no attempt to wipe them away, let alone close my eyes. The room was not particularly hot, nor was I running a fever, though I'd wished I'd been sick on this particular day. It would have given me a good excuse not to take the test. Maybe I should feign illness, I thought. God knows I looked the part. Again, I quickly dismissed the idea. It would never work because I had used that excuse too many a time. Besides, more than half the scheduled time for the exam had elapsed, and it would be pointless at this point. I looked down again at my empty answer sheet, and the severity of the present situation really sunk in. My sweat poured down my head as a mild panic attack set in. I silently cursed myself for not studying the previous night. The football game in the field outside my house was way too enticing, and I had bowed to peer pressure like a cheap umbrella in a storm. In retrospect, studying last night would have had little effect on the outcome today. It was not like this was a pop quiz or a midterm exam that sprung on me and had not time to read. I had a full 8 years to prepare for this exam. Everyone knew that the whole point of a primary school education was to pass this exam and get into a good secondary school. It had been drummed into all and sundry from the get-go that this was a make or break 3 days. In one fluid motion, I looked around the room, making my desperation with a casual yawn and stretch. My closest colleagues were at least a meter away in either direction. None of my fellow examinees seemed troubled. They all had their eyes fixed squarely on their question papers, concentrating like their lives literally depended on it, before turning their attention to the answer sheet and shading away. I had never felt more alone in my whole life. A break in this almost choreographed dance of read then write caught my eye. I noticed that Vera, the girl to my immediate left, was not reading her question paper. Instead, she was surreptitiously lifting her school dress and reading off her thigh. I should have been outraged, but instead I myself for not thinking of that. I looked up at her totally impressed, then down at my shorts, and mentally pictured myself writing down information I would have needed in the exam room. Again, I cursed myself almost audibly this time. On the other hand, I could not imagine what would happen if I was caught cheating. With the last bit of courage in me, I called out to Paul, who sat some seats away from me. Since the commencement of the exams, he had his face buried in his question papers as he seemed to answer with extreme ease. I winked at him and he got the sign. Slowly, he tore a small part of his paper and hurriedly scribbled some answers on it. I watched him as he worked. The mere thought terrified me to the point of causing my saliva to taste like sawdust in my mouth. I could see it now in my mind. The disapproving look from my teachers, the disappointment from my parents, the school headmaster being forced to call the police, the dark interrogation room, and finally breaking down and selling Paul out as his source. The thought snapped me back to reality. I can't go through this. I folded the paper to a small square and placed it on my slipper. I looked around just to be sure I wasn't watched before sliding it down to me. I could feel my heart rate increase with fear rushing through my body. I was relieved as I picked the paper and opened to see the precious answers I was racking my head for. Just as I was about to drop the slipper and slide it back, I heard the booming voice of the chief invigilator. "John, what do you have in your hand there?" I almost peed in my pants as I held the paper in my hand. "Come outside," the chief invigilator shouted again. With shame and disgrace written over me, I stood in front of my classmates. The class became a bit noisy as the remaining students began murmuring. The invigilators called my parents and invited them over, and I just stood watching, waiting for the dreaded day to end.